Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva led Brazil during its economic boom in the first decade of the century. He is now back as its president for a third term after defeating Jair Bolsonaro by a narrow margin. But running the country now could prove much harder than the last time he was in charge. Politically, it's hugely divided. It's short of cash and economic growth has slowed. And Lula has made it clear his priority is pulling millions of Brazilians out of poverty, which he's done successfully before. He won international fame for building an extensive social welfare program during his 2003-2010 tenure. But it wasn't all rosy. He will also be remembered for his administration's involvement in corruption, which led him to being jailed for 580 days. His convictions were later annulled by Brazil's top court. When the president-elect is inaugurated in January, he will take control of an economy that faces numerous challenges. But Lula has given only a few details on his economic plans. He's expected to put the state back at the centre of economic policy-making and move away from the pro-market model of the Bolsonaro administration. The president-elect said he would push Congress to approve a tax reform which would exempt low earners from paying income tax. He's also pledged to abolish a constitutional spending cap to allow the government to spend more on social projects and infrastructure. The president-elect has also promised to combine responsible fiscal policy with social responsibility and sustainable development. He's also pledged to put a halt to illegal deforestation in the Amazon. Joining us from Sharjah in UAE is Jairo Lugo Ocando, Dean of the College of Communications at the University of Sharjah and a Latin American analyst. Many thanks for joining the programme, sir. Now, on the campaign trail, Lula offered rather broad strokes of his economic vision. There was putting the state at the centre of the economic development. What do you make of his plans so far?
Well, it's very interesting because Mr. Lula da Silva, who has been now re-elected, is going to confront a completely different scenario from the one he had in his first government. In this case, we have commodity prices that have come down in the market, which is a stark contrast to the time in which he was president the first time, in which commodity prices were on the rise. The other thing is the debt, the Brazilian national debt, which is seek to double between now and 2027, is a huge problem, which will demand measures of cutting public spending and renegotiating some of the international debts and agreements that Brazil has. And also, Mr. Lula da Silva will now confront both a Congress that is not in his favor and also a series of governorships and municipalities, which will be in the hands of the opposition. So it's going to be a very tricky ride for Mr. Lula da Silva, and it will be a time to prove himself that he's a state person capable of managing the challenges in front of him. So I think there's always the risk that when you're in campaign, you tend to offer more than you can deliver, and it's all about managing expectations. And as we've seen in Latin America, things can go very sour very quickly to new elected presidents once they go into power.
He's promised not to make the same mistakes as his predecessor from the Workers' Party, Dilma Rousseff, who was accused of economic mismanagement. Will he do things differently, do you think?
Well, I think he needs to also correct the mistakes he made in his first term, where cases of corruptions were rampant. Remember, there's, the two biggest scandals in Latin America, in the whole of Latin American corruption, the Overtrecht construction company and also other cases of corruption were rampant during his time. So I think one of the things that he has to be very careful is the management of public funds and making sure that he appoints the people who will be responsible for these funds, making sure that transparency and accountability prevail. Because it's not only about correcting the mistakes done by Ms. Dilma, or Mr. Jair Bolsonaro, who also made lots of mistakes, but about his own mistakes in his first government. So he's been elected on great expectations, but that also comes with a lot of responsibility.
He's also promised to tackle poverty, tackle inequality. I mean, that's his big thing. But can Brazil actually afford to all that social spending that he's promised?
Well, it all depends how clever and skillful his negotiator of the international debt are. I think there's room for Brazil is still a very strong industrial power in the global south. In terms of some of the exports it has, it's still very well placed. Some of the areas in the economy are relatively good. So I think he has some room of maneuver, but he does need to appoint the right people. And that's going to be very difficult because he came in a very complex set of arrangements with allies to power. So there's a lot of distribution of power that needs to take place, and depends what are their priorities established there. I think here we are confronting a case in which the challenges might overwhelm him if he doesn't have the right team, and if he doesn't empower this team to actually act decisively in particular areas. My main concern is about his political capital that can go very quickly. If you revise my own Twitter account back in the beginning of August, where most of the pollsters were saying that Mr. Da Silva was going to win for a margin of 15, 17 points, I was saying that the margin of his victory would be just 1%. I effectively predicted this because there's been it's a much more complex situation that people see. The legacy they left both in the government of Da Silva and the government of Dima was a legacy that included huge cases of corruption. People have not forgotten those things, and also in other areas like even in poverty. I mean, we cannot forget that people protested in Brazil by the fact they were building these huge stadiums and wasting all this money in huge parades and big events around the World Cup when they had actually huge needs in the country. And people got really upset and really angry about that.
You paint a very, very bleak picture for him and the state of Brazil's economy. What can he do to turn things round? Can he bring Brazil back onto the map?
Yes, of course. And I think one of the very interesting development is the new alliances at the BRIC stage. I think that Brazil has a very important powerhouse of industry that they can do. I think that even if he needs to do austerity programs, they can be done in a very clever way without affecting the poorest, and with doing it in a way that it can incentivize the industry. I think the government of Brazil has lots of waste in areas that are not really that of a priority, but there are other areas like education, health, and poverty alleviation, in which he can do a lot. And I'm sure the instinct of Mr. Da Silva are there. But it all depends on the ability to appoint a team that is serious, that is accountable, that is transparent, and overall that is efficient. I think he has an opportunity, a great opportunity of providing or leaving a great legacy of a progressive government that can make important changes.
Sounds like he should be hiring you on his team. Really good to talk to you, Jairo Luga Ocando, Dean of the College of Communication at the University of Sharjah.
Thank you.